The most agonizing poison on this earth doesn't come from a vial or a hidden blade, but from the venomous words of the people who share your own blood. An enemy can only mock your failures from a distance, but your family knows the exact vulnerabilities of your soul, choosing the precise moment to strike when you are already broken. You are nothing but an ugly, useless college dropout, an absolute strain on our finances and a permanent stain on this family's name, my father had roared, his voice bouncing brutally off the sterile walls of our pristine suburban kitchen. His face had been contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust as he pointed a trembling, manicured finger toward the front door, while my mother stood silently behind him, carefully adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet without offering me a single glance of maternal mercy. Beside them stood my golden child younger sister, Chloe, who was smirked triumphantly as she swiped through her phone, basking in the glorious realization that she was now the sole focus of our family's immense wealth and affection. That night, 5 years ago, the rain had been falling in relentless, icy sheets, turning the asphalt outside into a dark, unforgiving mirror that reflected my complete and total isolation. I remembered the heavy, suffocating weight of my cheap canvas duffel bag tearing at my shoulder as I was violently pushed out onto the wet pavement, the harsh, metallic click of the front door deadbolt locking behind me sounding like a definitive execution sentence. I had dropped out of my prestigious university not because of laziness or academic failure, but because a severe, undiagnosed autoimmune condition had left me chronically exhausted, entirely unable to keep up with the brutal, unforgiving pace of their superficial expectations. Instead of offering a hand to help me stand, they had collectively decided to treat my physical illness as a moral failure, throwing me away like a piece of worthless domestic garbage because I no longer fit into their carefully curated image of a perfect, elite lineage. I sat on the freezing curb that night, the freezing water soaking through my worn sneakers, listening to the distant, mocking hum of the home's heating system while my own family enjoyed a warm dinner inside. As the icy water dripped from my matted hair, a profound, terrifying silence had settled over my chest, a freezing clarity that permanently crystallized into a dark, unyielding vow. They had judged my entire human worth based on my temporary brokenness, my pale, hollow face, and a piece of paper from an institution that cared nothing for my survival. I picked up my torn bag, turned my back on the grand estate I had once called home, and walked into the dark, foggy abyss of the city, completely dead to the people who had brought me into this world. The next 3 years were a brutal, silent masterclass in human endurance, a grueling descent into a lonely, subterranean world of nonstop work and absolute isolation. I rented a windowless, damp basement apartment that smelled of rusted pipes and old concrete, surviving entirely on instant coffee, generic oatmeal, and the burning, intoxicating hunger for absolute vindication. My illness did not vanish, but without the toxic, crushing weight of my family's constant emotional abuse, my body slowly began to heal, adapting to the brutal routine I imposed upon myself. I taught myself advanced software architecture and distributed ledger engineering during the lonely, quiet hours between midnight and dawn, coding until my eyes literally bled from the harsh blue glare of a cheap, cracked monitor. I discovered a massive, completely unexploited vulnerability in global supply chain data matrices, designing a proprietary, fully automated micrologistics software that could save international shipping conglomerates tens of millions of dollars in transit overhead. I worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, completely disappearing from the face of the earth, erasing every single trace of my digital existence so that no one from my past life could ever track my progress. When the first major multi-million-dollar acquisition offer for my software platform landed in my inbox from a tech titan in Silicon Valley, I didn't celebrate, I didn't buy an expensive car, and I didn't make a single social media post. Instead, I channeled every single dollar back into building a private, anonymous ghost empire, quietly acquiring commercial real estate assets, digital logistics patents, and high-yield institutional debt portfolios under a multi-layered Delaware holding company called Morpheus Holdings. Simultaneously, I undertook a radical, disciplined transformation of my physical form, working out with a brutal, military precision in the dark corners of a local powerlifting gym until the soft, hollow contours of my sickly youth were entirely replaced by dense, lean muscle and a sharp, commanding posture. I learned how to dress with the subtle, quiet luxury of the ultra-wealthy, trading my old, oversized thrift store clothes for bespoke, hand-tailored Italian wool suits that accentuated my new, powerful physique. By the time the 5-year mark arrived, I was no longer the sickly, insecure college dropout they had thrown onto the wet pavement. I was a multi-millionaire CEO operating in the highest shadows of the global tech sector, holding the financial lifelines of dozens of secondary firms in the palm of my hand. And then a brief, automated notification popped up on my encrypted terminal, an invitation that had been forwarded through several of my corporate shell addresses. It was a public announcement for the grand graduation ceremony of the university's elite business class, featuring a prominent, front-page photo of my younger sister, Chloe, who was graduating at the top of her class. The venue was the historic Grand Symphony Hall downtown, an opulent, high-ceilinged palace of gold leaf, velvet curtains, and polished mahogany where the city's highest society always gathered to flaunt their unearned privileges. I smiled a slow, cold smile for the first time in half a decade, realizing that the universe had just hand-delivered the absolute, perfect stage for a masterful, devastating execution of poetic justice. On the morning of the graduation, a thick, expensive fog hung over the city, slowly burning away to reveal a brilliant, crystalline sky as hundreds of luxury vehicles began packing the entrance of the Symphony Hall. The air outside the venue was thick with the suffocating scent of expensive French perfumes, rich leather upholstery, and the low, velvet murmur of the city's elite bragging about their children's upcoming corporate placements. I arrived precisely 10 minutes before the opening processional, my custom, matte black armored Mercedes Pullman pulling up directly to the main VIP red carpet with a silent, heavy authority that instantly commanded the attention of the surrounding crowd. The chauffeur stepped out swiftly, opening the door for me as I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke, midnight navy Tom Ford suit, the fabric catching the bright morning sun with a subtle, luxurious sheen. A soft, curious ripple of whispers instantly washed through the crowd of waiting parents and university officials as I stepped onto the carpet, my posture radiating the immense, cold confidence of a man who owned the entire block. "Who is that?" "Is that the new venture capitalist from Morpheus Holdings?" a prominent local hedge fund manager whispered to his wife, his eyes tracking my movement with a deep, reverent curiosity. I ignored the staring eyes, walking smoothly through the grand brass doors and into the main lobby, where the heavy scent of fresh lilies and polished wood hung over the sprawling crowd of wealthy families. As I made my way toward the exclusive, glass-walled VIP boxes overlooking the main auditorium, my gaze drifted across the crowded lower mezzanine, instantly locking onto 3 familiar, unforgettable silhouettes. There they were, my father, my mother, and Chloe, standing near a large, golden floral arrangement, desperately trying to project their usual aura of supreme, untouchable arrogance to the surrounding executives. But as I looked closer, utilizing the sharp, analytical precision I had developed over years of forensic business auditing, I noticed the subtle, glaring fractures in their carefully constructed facade. My father's tailored suit was clearly from a collection that was 3 seasons old, his face looking remarkably weathered, tired, and lined with a deep, permanent anxiety that no amount of expensive tanning could fully conceal. My mother's hands were trembling slightly as she clutched a designer handbag that had visible wear along the leather straps, her eyes scanning the room with a frantic, insecure desperation that felt entirely pathetic to witness. Even Chloe, despite her expensive graduation cap and gown, looked tightly wound, her smile forced and artificial as she tried to catch the attention of the university's major institutional donors. I knew exactly why they looked so utterly decayed beneath their superficial armor. My holding company, Morpheus Holdings, had quietly purchased their primary commercial bank debt 2 months ago. They had spent the last 5 years recklessly leveraging their remaining family estate to fund Chloe's lavish international lifestyle, and my father's failing real estate investments, entirely unaware that their mysterious new institutional creditor was the very child they had cast out as garbage. I walked slowly down the plush, carpeted stairs of the mezzanine, my steps silent but entirely purposeful, cutting straight through the crowd of wealthy families until I stood precisely 10 feet away from them. My mother was the first to turn around, her eyes casually sweeping over my custom suit before freezing entirely as her gaze drifted up to lock onto my face. The designer handbag she was holding slipped from her fingers, hitting the polished marble floor with a dull, heavy thud as the color completely, violently drained from her face, leaving her a ghostly, sickening shade of pale shock. "Daniel, look," she gasped out, her voice a faint, terrified wheeze as she clutched her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. My father turned around with an irritated, arrogant frown, his mouth opening to deliver a sharp rebuke before the words died completely in his throat, his eyes widening into huge, circular pools of absolute cognitive dissonance. Chloe stopped her frantic texting, her jaw dropping open in a horrific, ungraceful mask of confusion as she looked at the powerful, impeccably styled man standing before her, completely unable to reconcile my presence with the sickly, broken dropout they had thrown into the rain. "Lana," my father finally stammered out, his voice shaking with a sudden, palpable panic that made several nearby executives turn their heads to look at our group in curiosity. "No, it can't be you. You were supposed to be." His voice trailed off as his eyes darted from my hand-tailored suit to the diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch resting against my wrist. "Good morning, Daniel," I said, my voice a deep, resonant, and entirely unbothered baritone that carried a strange, dangerous quiet that instantly silenced their entire section of the mezzanine. "I see you are still adjusting your tennis bracelets while the foundation of your entire life completely turns to absolute dust," I added, offering my mother a cold, mocking nod. "Lana, oh my God, look at you," my mother suddenly cried out, her tone instantly shifting from paralyzed shock into a sickening, sycophantic warmth as she took a desperate step toward me, her arms reaching out instinctively. "We've been looking for you for years. We were so worried about your illness. We always hoped you would come home so we could fix everything," she lied, her eyes gleaming with a disgusting, desperate hope. I stepped back slightly, just enough to leave her arms hanging emptily in the air, a movement so smooth and deliberate that it made several nearby board members raise their eyebrows in silent amusement. "Do not insult my intelligence by rewriting history in a public lobby, Mother," I replied, my voice dropping to an icy, lethal whisper that made her flinch as if she had been physically struck. "You didn't look for me for a single second. You were too busy financing Chloe's high society vanity projects with capital you no longer legally owned." Chloe's face flushed a violent, dangerous shade of crimson, her initial shock briefly giving way to her old, familiar entitlement as she stepped forward, her hands clenching into fists against her graduation gown. "How dare you come here to ruin my special day?" Chloe hissed, her voice sharp and venomous, though it carried an underlying tremble of pure terror. "You're just a dropout. I don't care how much money you stole or what fake suit you're wearing, you are nothing compared to me." My father instantly grabbed Chloe's shoulder, pulling her back with a frantic, terrifying force that caught her completely off guard. "Chloe, shut your mouth immediately," he roared at her, his voice cracking with a sudden, desperate panic that made her eyes widen in shock. He turned back to me, his hands shaking violently as he practically dropped to his knees right there on the polished marble floor of the symphony hall, his old, arrogant posture completely shattered into a million pathetic pieces. "Lana, please, you have to listen to me," my father begged, his tone changing from his historical, booming arrogance to a sniveling, desperate crawl that made my stomach turn with profound contempt. "We are in a catastrophic financial situation. The commercial banks have completely frozen our primary operating lines. A massive holding company called Morpheus Holdings just called in our entire estate mortgage. If we don't secure an emergency capital injection of $4 million by midnight tonight, the federal marshals are going to seize our house, our vehicles, and everything we own." Chloe won't even be able to accept her corporate placement because our family name will be permanently ruined in the public registries by tomorrow morning. My mother joined him, her eyes filling with genuine, terrified tears as she grabbed the edge of my coat sleeve, her voice a high-pitched, pathetic whine that echoed across the listening lobby. Please, Lana, you're our child. You clearly have achieved immense success. Look at your vehicle, look at your staff. You can save us with a single signature. We made a mistake 5 years ago. We were just stressed about the family legacy. We didn't mean the things we said to you. She cried, her dignity completely evaporating in front of the entire elite society she had spent her life worshipping. I looked down at the two of them, my expression entirely devoid of anger, hatred, or even a sense of petty triumph. I felt nothing but the vast, cold neutrality of a judge reading a final verdict to a group of convicted criminals. The crowd of surrounding executives, university donors, and high society parents had completely stopped their own conversations, their faces tight with a burning, desperate curiosity as they watched the billionaire tech mogul look down at his sniveling, bankrupt family. I slowly reached down, detaching my mother's trembling fingers from the fabric of my bespoke suit jacket with a clinical, unbothered precision, before smoothing out the microscopic wrinkles her touch had left behind. You want an emergency capital injection from Morpheus Holdings to save your superficial family legacy? I asked softly, my voice carrying a smooth, amplified clarity that reached every single ear in the immediate area. My father looked up, a sudden, blinding flash of pure, unadulterated hope illuminating his weathered face as he nodded frantically, his chest heaving with a desperate relief. Yes, Lana. Please, tell your legal team to authorize the extension. We will do anything you want. I leaned down slightly, looking him directly in his frantic, sweating eyes, letting him see the absolute, ironclad architecture of the ghost empire he had unwittingly marched his entire family into. I am Morpheus Holdings, father, I whispered, my words sliding through his rising hope like a frozen steel blade. The absolute, crushing weight of that single sentence seemed to physically paralyze the entire family, my father's face freezing into a horrific mask of total, unmitigated comprehension as his jaw literally dropped open. My mother gasped, a sudden, sharp intake of breath that sounded like she was suffocating, while Chloe staggered backward against the golden floral arrangement, her phone slipping from her hand and shattering against the marble. And 5 years ago, right inside that kitchen, you explicitly stated that I was a permanent stain on this family's name, a worthless piece of garbage that deserved to be thrown onto the wet pavement. I continued, my voice entirely deadpan, chillingly calm. You told me that a global legacy requires an unyielding, fierce vision that a broken dropout could never provide, and you locked your front door to ensure my complete destruction. I simply took your advice, utilized my own immense intellect, and built an empire in the absolute silence of the shadows while you were busy driving your family into total bankruptcy. My father began to weep openly, his tears running down his weathered cheeks as he reached out a desperate, shaking hand toward the floor, realizing that the very child he had cast out was the absolute owner of his survival. Lana, please, we will starve. We will have nowhere to go. Have mercy on your own blood, he choked out, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper that carried no remaining shred of human dignity. I straightened my posture, looking over their heads at the grand stage inside the auditorium where the graduation processional music was finally beginning to echo through the high brass doors. You should have thought about the sanctity of blood when you threw your sick child out into a freezing rainstorm to satisfy your petty, superficial pride, I said quietly, my tone completely devoid of any remaining human connection. My legal team will proceed with the full asset seizure and foreclosure protocols at precisely midnight tonight, and I expect your personal items to be cleared from my property by dawn. Consider this my final operational brief to the Connors family legacy. You wanted a fierce, unyielding vision, and you are finally getting exactly what you earned. I turned on my heel, refusing to offer them another single second of my time or a single drop of my energy, and walked smoothly toward the main exit of the symphony hall. Lana! Wait! Lana! My mother screamed behind me, her voice rising to a horrific, desperate shriek that was instantly drowned out by the thunderous, majestic opening chords of the university's graduation march. The crowd of elite guests parted before me like the Red Sea, their faces filled with a deep, reverent awe as they watched the powerful CEO walk away from the ruined, sobbing wrecks of his former family. I stepped out into the brilliant, warm morning sun, my chauffeur instantly opening the heavy, armored door of my Mercedes Pullman as a profound, clean sense of absolute, unyielding peace washed over my entire soul. I sat back against the plush, custom leather seats of the vehicle, the door closing with a heavy, satisfying thud that permanently shut out the chaotic, pathetic screams of my past life. The car glided effortlessly away from the curb, moving smoothly through the financial district as I pulled out my secure, encrypted tablet to review the upcoming international tech acquisitions for the next fiscal quarter. By midnight that night, the collapse of my family's estate was absolute, an automated legal execution that unfolded with the flawless, terrifying velocity of a controlled demolition. The federal marshals arrived at the suburban mansion at precisely 12:01 a.m., officially padlocking the grand brass doors and seizing every single asset, luxury vehicle, and bank account associated with the family name. My father and mother were forced to pack their remaining clothes into cheap garbage bags, stepping out onto the very same suburban pavement where they had thrown me 5 years prior, completely homeless and utterly ruined. Chloe's prestigious corporate placement was instantly revoked by the hiring board due to the massive, highly publicized financial scandal and the criminal fraud investigations launched against our father's investments. They were left with absolutely nothing but a mountain of unpayable institutional debt, a completely destroyed reputation, and the permanent, crushing realization that their own arrogance had destroyed them. A month later, I stood on the private, sunlit helipad of my new corporate headquarters overlooking the sparkling international harbor, a warm cup of coffee resting in my hand as the morning breeze ruffled my hair. My legal team had seamlessly absorbed their former estate, turning the grand suburban mansion into a private, fully funded convalescent home for low-income patients suffering from chronic autoimmune illnesses. I looked out over the vast, blue expanse of the open ocean, watching my massive, newly chartered logistics vessels slide effortlessly toward the horizon, their hulls cutting through the deep water with perfect precision. I had honored my true potential not by allowing myself to be broken by their toxic entitlement, but by having the brilliant, strategic foresight to know my own immense, untouchable worth. I took a slow, deep sip of my coffee, turned away from the ledge, and walked back into the vibrant, high-tech sanctuary of my boardroom, ready to lead my global empire into a flawless, limitless, and completely triumphant tomorrow.